I have taken my Mjolner Heirophant up to level 100, and I've had a lot of fun the entire way. It's a pretty amazing build. I've really been enjoying it. I've made a few updates to it, some changes kind of to make the gearing a little bit easier to follow along with, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, it's Lerald, blah, blah, blah. All right, so first things first. GGG made this post recently talking about the 3.25 expansion timeline, and I didn't think that this deserved a whole video. You know, this is only like, whatever, 30 seconds of discussion here. But as they say here, they're looking for a late July release for the 3.25 expansion, which means that Necropolis is probably going to last a little while longer. So because of this post, I went back and looked at some League releases from 2020 until now, made a little spreadsheet out of how long they were up, and I saw a Reddit comment that said that Sentinel was the last time we had a 13-week League, and I couldn't believe that, but actually that was true. I know a lot of people wanted Necropolis to be kind of a shorter League since that it has been less popular among the community, to put it nicely, and I mean, I think that would have been nice. However, if it had been a 12 or 13-week League, that would have put the expansion ending well, in just a couple of weeks here. And more importantly, it would put the new expansion coming out, whatever, you know, calling it Outlaw expansion, whatever it is, you know, question marks expansion, that would put it out on, if I'm looking at my calendar on my second monitor here, that would put it coming out June 21st. And there's something happening on June 20th that definitely made that impossible. GGG have basically all confirmed that they're huge Elden Ring fans, and rightly so. Elden Ring is awesome. They should be big fans, and the idea of dropping a new League one day after Elden Ring's DLC comes out would be terrible. Even doing it a week after would be terrible. So I actually appreciate them giving us several weeks. Now, this is just a guess that it'll be the 16th of July that the League ends. It always ends on a Tuesday before the Friday of the new League releasing, so you really only have 2 Fridays that it could be. It could either be July 19th or July 26th, because then the 31st is like a Wednesday, and so, you know, they did say late July, so it wouldn't then be early August. So with that being said, you know, looks like we're looking at about 6 more weeks or so of Necropolis League, but during that time, there's going to be Elden Ring. You know, there's still a lot more stuff to play around with in Necropolis League and kind of get hyped about whatever the next League is going to be. And then, you know, hopefully we'll get Boat League before the end of the year. And then the reason I pulled up this Kalandra stuff is I just wanted to remind people of the actual worst League of all time, Kalandra League. You know, I think Necropolis League, whatever criticisms you might have of it, many of which I'm sure are very fair, still is much better League, in my opinion. Much better state of the end game than Lake of Kalandra. All right, now I just want to talk about what I've been doing on the character. So obviously I hit level 100 in tier 16s. I talked about it in our last video where I talked about how to level from 99 to 100 in like under 2 hours or under 40 maps or whatever. It was both. And then since doing that, I've been farming tier 17s. I've killed a bunch of Uber bosses. It's all just been a real smooth experience. You know, so smooth. After playing this build for a while, no other build is going to be able to compete with this, at least in terms of smoothness and, you know, kind of speed too while we're at it. I also did a simulacrum. I actually did 2 simulacrums. Somebody left one comment asking if this build handles simulacrums well, and, you know, it handles tier 17s and Ubers, so of course the answer is going to be yes, but I felt like I needed to actually test, and that's really kind of a good demonstration of something that I only just realized, which is that with a single comment, you can waste 30 minutes or even an hour of my life. So, you know, use that power at your discretion, I guess. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is hit rate. That is something that I think I didn't do the best job of explaining, or I don't know, maybe it's very complicated. I think it could deserve just a little bit more explanation from the previous video. In balancing cast on crit builds, you need to balance like your cooldown rate and your crit chance and your attack speed. Now, thankfully with this build, because of Mjolnir, you know, just triggering the spell on hit with a cooldown, you don't have to balance any sort of crit, but you do have to balance hit chance, so it really winds up being very similar. I fixed that by just running Precision instead of the Dread Banner I was running before. I thought about swapping to Defiance Banner. I didn't think the Defiance Banner would really do, you know, Dread and Defiance Banner are both fairly defensive. Dread Banner is really good if you're doing this as a Grace build, like if you run Grace instead of, one of your other defensive auras. Then Dread Banner has really good synergy by reducing enemies' chance to hit, reducing their accuracy. That'll increase your evade chance. Not a bad option. Defiance Banner's, kind of coming at that approach from the opposite direction, increasing your evasion rating and enemy crit chance. Both useful defensive options, but I ultimately just went with Precision for guaranteeing that I'm at 100% hit chance. Really made things a lot easier to deal with in terms of balancing attack speed. So when you're balancing out your trigger rate, what you're looking for is you have the cooldown of the skill being triggered, and you want your attack speed to be slightly lower than that. Like, the closer it is to it, that means that's less time that it's just sitting on cooldown unused. But if your attack speed goes over the cooldown, like if you're attacking more quickly than the cooldown resets, then you're going to hit a second time, and then you'll have to wait for the entire third attack to happen before you're able to trigger that cooldown again. So right now, my cooldown of the trigger is 0.231. That's adjusting for the server's tick rate. And I'm hitting slightly less often than that. So I'm hitting every 0.232 seconds, something like that. I'm hitting like just ever so slightly less often than the cooldown comes up, which is perfect. And like I could demonstrate that very easily by taking just this point here that would increase my attack speed, and watch, my damage just went way down. And if I increase my attack speed some more, my damage goes down even further. You can see I could gain 50% more damage just by dropping this attack speed bonus. So that's really what you're looking for in trying to balance out your attack speed. It is something you'll kind of have to figure out based on the state of your gear. You'll see that I have swapped Mjolnir's back from the one that had the attack speed enchant and the attack speed corruption on it. And the reason that I've done that, and I've also dropped this 2-point talent here, obviously, that was giving accuracy and attack speed. And, I've been able to make the hit chance work with precision. You don't actually need a level 20 precision. You only need like 3,800 accuracy or so. And the precision is, if we switch over to Cyclone, the precision is giving me, I think I did play around with this level 9 is all I needed. It is something you'll have to figure out, kind of play around with this and look at your Cyclone, look at your hit chance, and kind of you can feather that in, and then you can up your clarity a bit. But the thing is that upping your clarity's level really only gives you a little bit more mana regen. It's not that immensely valuable. So just in the interest of like, if you're dealing with monsters that have increased evasion because of Lantern of Aramor or whatever, just having a bit of extra hit chance is not a bad thing. And so I just went up over 4K accuracy, guarantee that I'm always going to hit everything all the time. Never have any sort of situations where suddenly I'm missing and my trigger rate is going way, 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 way down. I'm losing like 30, 40, 50% of my damage because of that. I'm willing to lose, what is this? 1063 mana regen with a level 7 clarity. I think I could get it up to like 14 or 15. 50 mana per second. I think I can live with that difference. Maybe I could try feathering it in there a little bit, but ultimately, like, if I were to kind of wiggle precision and clarity around a bit, I still don't really think that the gain would be all that significant. So I just went for jacking precision all the way up. So in order to fix that hit rate, the thing I've done is I've just gone with a 10% increased attack speed during effect Flask, which with 70% increased effect, and the current state of my boots being 9% CDR and 5% action speed. Like I talked about in the previous video, 10% winds up being the magic number on the attack speed Flask. An easy way to check that for yourself is to make a utility Flask and kind of like basically just see with increased effect. It doesn't have to be max, that's fine, but then increased effect and with a 70% enchantment, and then attack speed on it, kind of dial in what that right number is. Although you do want to make sure that you're set to your trigger spell, Ball Lightning, and not to Cyclone while you're doing that, because Cyclone will give you an inaccurate number on that. And so this is basically the way I figured out that it needed to be 10% was I just did this. I just tried to like figure out, you know, like would 11% work? Nope, that would lower my hit DPS. Okay. You know, like 10% wasn't lowering my hit DPS. You know, it was bringing it up to the maximum, 11 lower. You know, everything above that was putting me over the amount that I needed. All right, so now I want to talk about some of the skill changes I've made. I kind of already addressed that a little bit. I did switch over to using precision. As I said, I am using a level 20 precision, and then just, you know, kind of bringing my clarity up to whatever level from there to kind of squeeze out every little bit of remaining health that I have, remaining life that I have, you know, so that for every 100 life that you reserve, you get that plus 30 max energy shield. So ideally, if you can get, you know, you kind of want to look at your life pool and then squeeze away, basically squeeze it all away in increments of 100. So like ideally, if I could get my life up to like 2110 or whatever, and then squeeze down to 10, that would be a little bit more energy shield than I'm getting right now. But you know, it's fine. It is what it is. Now, I didn't really make huge changes, but I have done some more experimentation with the cast while channeled spell in your body armor, and I kind of want to talk about that, especially in the context of some higher level content. Now, you'll notice that I don't have automation support turned on for Arcane Cloak. Where is it? Here it is. And the reason for that is just I want to be able to zip around in my hideout, but I have been, of course, keeping that on. I've just been automating using Arcane Cloak for all content. I even did for Ubers, for tier 17s. The only thing I ever really did that involved like actively manually using it is during some of the intermissions on some of the bosses like Uber Cirrus, Uber Shaper, Uber Elder. I turned it off and I just let it sit and regen mana when they were completely unattackable. You know, when Uber Shaper is doing his ultimate chaos phase, I would turn off automation support. Much to my annoyance, the whole premise of this build was to take it and make it as super simple, super brainless as possible. And during that, if I felt I needed to, I'd hit Vol Discipline as well, just to stay alive, and then just kind of dance around. And once I felt that he was going to be attackable again, flick that automation support and go absolutely ham. And the thing is that, you know, if you're not actively casting, like leaving it automated, leaving the Arcane Cloak automated will mean that you're never quite at full mana while dealing with that. Now, normally you're going to be able to mana leech and you're fine. But obviously, like if you're holding Cyclone in between pulls, then that increased cost because of Indigon combining with Arcane Cloak is going to mean that you're going to be kind of tapped out. So in Uber Boss situations, thinking about Uber Cirrus's many phase transitions and just periods of being unattackable, you know, a little annoying. Now, one other change that I made for dealing with Uber Bosses in tier 17 specifically was instead of using the Lightning Warp super speed approach, you know, I think this works really well for tier 17 trash, actually. I think that this worked really, really well. I was very pleased with how it went. However, I think it kind of goes without saying that this, teleporting around like this, is maybe not the best for dodging boss mechanics. So for dealing with those, I did switch over to, instead of this one, the 2 blue, 1 red, 3 green Ivory Tower setup, I did switch over to same green gem, same Cyclone, Mana Leech, and Culling Strike, and same Awaken Cast while channeling. But then, as I said in the past video, I really like Shock Nova and Overcharge support. I think this has worked really well, really well, for making it so that you do the maximum amount of damage. You're very like safe and consistent, able to just kind of camp on bosses, moving around them, hitting them with both. You can kind of see how there's like an outer swirly and an inner ring with the runes on it, and you're able to hit them with both of those, especially if you have an increased area of effect corrupt on your Mjolnir. Not that you have to, but you know, it's not bad. And this really like just made it so that I was able to much more easily keep bosses, like keep them with a big shock. And so because of that, we don't have to run Arcane Surge support in our Squire. We're able to just run Elemental Focus, since we're not going to get any shocks out of our Ball Lightning. That's okay. We're getting all the shocks we need out of our Shock Nova support with Overcharge, or Shock Nova with Overcharge support. that was really the approach I used for killing Uber bosses. Now for leveling, I actually used Lightning Conduit of the Heavens with Awakened Lightning Pin, and so then because of that, I did still stick with Arcane Surge in the Squire, hooking up to Ball Lightning. And the reason for that was I leveled with Breach, and I found that just being able to off-screen, or, you know, edge of the screen tag stuff with the Lightning Conduit of the Heavens and super speed clear those breaches out was actually a lot better than Shock Nova, and I found it to be a little bit more consistent than Lightning Warping in Breach specifically. Your mileage is going to vary on that, though. Like, you could very much just hook this up to Lightning Warp with less duration support and just run that permanently, and that would be fine. You could use basically any of these 3 setups permanently, and they'd be fine. You know, Lightning Conduit, I think the main advantage that it offers is that you can actually tag stuff from far away. This does mean that, you know, a lot of stuff is going to die before you can get in a range to Cyclone it, so you're not going to have as much mana to work with your Arcane Cloak, so your average damage will probably be lower, but you're going to be clearing so fast that I don't really think it matters. But that is sort of the one upside downside that I can point out. I basically haven't used Arc or Awakened Chain since the last video. I suppose if I accidentally made my way into a less area of effect map, that would be a good move. I did do a less area of effect map that also had like a million modifiers. This is a tier 17, obviously, like a million rare mods on rare monsters. I think it was like 9 or 10 mods I was having on most of the monsters, and that map was terrible, and I definitely should have switched to the Arc support, or the Arc with the chain support. I didn't, and I didn't realize basically until I'd finished the map just like how bad of a time I was having. I did another map that was similar. It had also like 8 or 9 mods on all of the rares, but it didn't have the reduced area of effect, and it was like totally fine, totally trivially easy, no problem at all. So definitely it indicated to me that that the like less area of effect really is a terrible modifier for this build. You know, you really do want to be able to hit stuff with your Cyclone, and I think I was just literally like unable to hit a lot of enemies with Cyclone because my area of effect was reduced so badly. So with that being said, the other 2 auras I'm using are still the same, Wrath and Discipline. I'm still using Clarity, although I am using, I was able to level it up slightly because of switching from Dread Banner to Precision. That's worked out fine. Still using Call to Arms, still using automation on the Arcane Cloak. I haven't given up and actually started hand casting it. I'm not going to be doing that. I just found that for Uber bosses specifically, turning it off during their intermission phases was like not a bad idea, right? Being able to press that button and have it ready to go, have that buff up and running when it's time to blast them is the move. Now, I mean, you know, it is also a defensive bonus. Arcane Cloak is a really big defensive bonus, so it is something that you can keep automated while you're dealing with some of their intermission phases, while you're dodging stuff, and actually like get that big shield to keep you alive. You know, you will be eating a ton of damage with that shield, so that is also an option. You could absolutely do that. But my goal is really to like kill Uber bosses as fast as possible. I haven't done all of them. I haven't done Maven because the keys for her are very expensive, and I have a lot of them. I kind of would rather have the money. I don't count on myself to be lucky. I know I'll crush her, and I just haven't farmed up enough Exarch and Eater keys. I actually like those bosses quite a bit, but again, like I did Uber Cirrus, and I did him deathless, very easily deathless, and like that for me has always been the hardest of the Uber bosses, and I think he really kind of solidified for me just how much harder tier 17s are than Uber bosses. Man, they are so much harder than Uber bosses. So, you know, miss by GGG on that attempt to make something that's a stepstone between tier 16s and Uber bosses, but on the other hand, I think a good demonstration of just how insanely strong this build can be. All right, now I wanted to move over to talking about gear upgrades. So I haven't upgraded my boots. I didn't feel that I really needed to make any changes to those, but I did make an upgrade to my Ivory Tower. I bought an Ivory Tower with reduced extra damage from crits as a corruption. You know, it doesn't have perfect rolls on the int or the mana, right? I kind of had to give up something somewhere to pull that off, but dying to crits was like kind of one of the most annoying things that I'd run into in tier 17 maps. And then I also bought a Squire that had reduced extra damage from crits, and the Squire was actually more expensive. I think it was like 10 divines or something. A base Squire's like, I don't know, 4 or 5, I think. Let's see, regular Squire. Okay, 6 to 8 divines, you know, maybe you'll spend a little bit on a squire, but you could try corrupting one yourself or just buying one. There are a lot of good defensive modifiers available for squire. I had one before that just had increased energy shield, bit of a damage and defensive increase as opposed to this one that's pure defense, but 28 and 50%, putting me at 78% reduced extra damage from crits. Now it would be nice to be able to come down and take a passive like Sanctum of Thought and just be totally like crit damage immune. But we're not operating at that level, and I'm not going to be throwing any tattoos onto my beautiful int nodes or anything. So I'm going to be able to just kind of live with 78% extra crit damage reduction. I think I can live with that. I think that's enough. It doesn't have to be zeroed out completely. I'm okay. I also made this ring, and I'm going to take that off, and wow, I did not expect to be able to keep my gear equipped, but all right, great. So you basically have two options for fancy rings, and I'll go ahead and pull those up here. You have, you know, the true fancy one. The really expensive one is a helical ring. It gives you 1 prefix modifier and 4 suffixes, and your suffixes are 50% increased magnitude. Or you can have a cogwork ring, which is what I bought. 2 prefixes, 4 suffixes, and 25% increased suffix modifier magnitudes. So the difference between these two rings is that instead of all the suffixes being 50% stronger, they're only 25% stronger, but I get an extra prefix. Now, prefixes really aren't that valuable for this build, but it does make crafting this ring easier. And more importantly, if we pull that up in PoE Ninja, base type ring. Helical rings are anywhere from like 85 to 100 plus divines, and cogwork rings are like 2 divines. So, you know, buying this one that had a, what is this? A tier 2 chaos fracture on it. I can't remember how much this cost. It might have been 20 divines or something, but it was, you know, if I wanted to buy a helical ring that had a chaos res fracture on it or a strength or an int fracture on it, that would probably be over 100, 150 divines. So definitely something you can opt into long term if you really want to push the build for all it's worth, but expensive. So ultimately what I did with this, as you can kind of see from the suffix modifier of the essences, I just rolled strength essences on it until I got a tier 1 int mod, and then I was lucky enough to get a tier 2 all res mod on it as well, and that really helped me fix my my resistances. You know, as you can see, like, I'm not fire res capped. I'm obviously not chaos res capped, which isn't mandatory. You don't have to be chaos res capped. As long as you're over 0, you're okay. But I really wanted that extra layer of protection. And, you know, ultimately what you're really looking for is strength and int, like an ideal ring. I tried crafting several of these. I made a couple that had like strength, int, and dex, and I sold them off. And, you know, that worked. But this is the only one that I made that I was like really happy with running myself, because I really do just like capping my resistances. So once I did that, once I just slammed essences on it, and, you know, arguably I should have probably used int essences of spite, because as you can see, the essence roll is from 51 to 58 instead of 51 to 55. But either way, rolled so that I had tier 1 strength and tier 1 int, and I was happy with the resistances on there. Maybe you could go for like all attributes or something instead if you wanted as well, if you really wanted to push how long you needed to roll it. And then it did have 1 prefix. So the way that I fixed that was I did this. I'll actually pull it up in the emulator. I think that's a good way to visualize this. And it kind of helps with visualizing why working with the cheapo ring, the cogwork ring, instead of the helical ring is so much easier. So this is, I think, an 85 or an 86 ring. I don't remember. And, you know, starting with a chaos res fracture. Chaos res is always kind of nice to start with if you want it on a piece of gear. You know, it's usually a little more expensive to get it fractured, but in the case of these rings, the attribute mods are actually a lot more expensive. And what's interesting here is that you can see the attribute mods are like way higher weight than chaos res. So starting with a chaos res fracture, so you're not having to fish for that, really does cut the amount of time you have to spend rolling like down by quite a bit. So I appreciated that. And then we should make sure this is catalysted as well. And what other attribute or what other mod do I have on here? All res, tier 2 all res. Okay, so my ring looked like you know, something like this. I had like a bad prefix mod on there as well as these. And so the thing you can do with that is actually super simple. You just come down and you do a crafted, suffixes cannot be changed. And then you hit it with a scour, just one, and it will scour all the prefixes because you have suffixes can't be changed. It'll scour all the prefixes, which will get rid of that other prefix. Then you craft another suffix can't be changed, and they haven't updated the Ray Crafter for veiled orbs yet. This costs 14 divines or so, which is, you know, expensive. And see, this right here is kind of demonstrating how different this would be if I were running a helical ring. If it were a helical ring and it had a bad prefix, I wouldn't be able to craft suffixes can't be changed and scour. I would just literally have to annul. I would just have to YOLO annul and hope I got the prefix. And thankfully, we're not in that situation because of using the cheapo ring. So I say cheapo, it's still like 20 divines, but compared to 200 divines, that's very cheap. So, you know, use that, scour that off, and then craft another suffixes can't be changed, and then hit it with a veiled orb. But again, veiled orbs aren't implemented correctly in the Ray Crafter yet, so we're going to use an Ashling Veil, as they're still calling it. And we'll use that, and what that will do is that will add a modifier. So you do have to have an empty modifier to be able to use the Veiled Orb at all. And then it will remove a modifier. And because you have suffixes can't be changed, you know, you have full suffixes, so it can't add a suffix. So it can only add one prefix. That's the only option. Then it will try to remove one of the other mods that are on the item. It can't remove any of the suffix because you have suffixes can't be changed, and it can't remove itself, so it can only remove this one crafted mod here. So we do that, and then before we unveil, we want to try to block, and I do want to unveil mana. You know, it would be ideal to get mana and damage taken recouped as mana. That's kind of preferred. But mana, reduced cost of mana cost of skills is whatever. Mana would be fine. Ultimately, I just crafted maximum life. I just wanted to block life mods because I don't want life. I really want to unveil mana. That's the ideal. And all of the different cold damage mods, you know, cold and lightning, fire and cold, fire and lightning. If you block one of those, if you craft one of those, let's do that here. I'll craft fire and cold. It only blocks that one. It doesn't block the other two. So you're better off just blocking life. And then that'll block all of the potential, like just the one life node really. But like there just isn't a great way to block like all of the damage nodes or you know, the one life node. So I blocked the life node. It seems, I think it has a fairly high weight, seems to. So that's a good one to block. And then we unveil and we hope for mana. And you really want either, you know, mana recoup, mana regen, mana reduce mana cost of skills is probably the worst one. It is the one I got though. And then from there, not a ton of options to craft on there. Ultimately, I just went with increased damage. Seemed like the best option. Rolled that up to T1, and then there you go. That is the ring, and I've been really happy with that. I killed all of the Ubers before I crafted this ring for what it's worth. Like previously, I was just running these two clearly inferior rings. You know, not bad. Strength, int, res, and then just crafted mana and damage taken, recouped as mana. And this one also chaos res, strength, int, and then crafted mana, damage taken, recouped as mana. I don't even have a 6 modifier on here. I don't even know what I would want it to be. Let's just whatever. Let's just see what we get. I bet it's going to be bad. Not as bad as it could be. Anyways, you know, like ultimately I just went with I went with these cheapo rings. These were pretty cheap. These only cost a couple of divines each. This one I bought a chaos res fractured amethyst ring. You know, it was like a, what is that, a tier 3 chaos res fracture, so not very expensive really in the grand scheme. And I just rolled it with essences of rage until I got T1 int, and then I just crafted max mana and damage taken, recoup this mana on it. I did not find that damage taken, recoup this mana was like that game changing. I have played around with it a bit, but I ultimately never really found it to be that amazing. In my experience, but I was definitely able to tell the difference with this ring. You know, it is quite a bit stronger. The sudden jump up in int from whatever it was I was at before. Let's just compare here. The sudden jump up from like 1350 int up to 1399 int, and then also like more strength and more mana. More importantly, more mana. You know, it was pretty noticeable. And then as for like getting a Calandra's Touch, that's really the thing about these kind of rings is, you know, they're expensive. They're an investment for sure. This is a 30 divine ring, which is not, you know, not as expensive as a 150 divine ring, but still not cheap. Is, you know, you just run a Calandra's Touch. Calandra's Touch is like 5 divines or so this league. Super cheap. And now you've basically doubled your money. And so it really makes it a lot more palatable that base ring is like so expensive because, you know, you're able to basically double its value for very, very low investment, at least comparatively speaking. One other thing that I did shift around is if I'm going to deal with a super curse heavy map, I have this increased movement speed, amethyst flask, and, you know, all of my flasks, they're just like flask skins here. I think they look nice. But instead of running the move speed one, unfortunately, I don't just have one that's reduced effective curses as an amethyst flask yet. Maybe I could buy one. But in any case, you know, switching over to attack speed and reduced effective curses and giving up that move speed, totally justifiable for some of the tier 17 maps that have like triple curses. You know, I think that's been pretty good. In terms of the Atlas passive tree, I did take these 2 points out of precision here, and with those 2 points and then leveling up to 100, I came over and I took Ash, Frost, and Storm, and these 3 points really aren't very good on their own, but the Elemental Mastery, the 25% chance to hit, 25% chance to treat enemy monster elemental resistance values as inverted is incredibly good on bosses. We can just show that off here. On bosses, it is 12.5% more damage just on its own, so that whole wheel is about 3 million DPS if we're counting half of the bolts hitting, and that's really something as well that I kind of undersold here with this build is, you know, the damage per bolt is like 3.4 million DPS, but you're not hitting with one bolt, you're hitting with a lot of them. And I actually think that half bolts is an underestimate as well. You know, all bolts is maybe a bit of an overestimate, 44 million DPS, but maybe not. And there's also the damage of, you know, your cyclone damage is whatever, but then the shock nova damage is also like 1 million DPS or so, maybe more on bosses, and it's really clearing everything out super quickly. So I really like this 4-point wheel here. You know, if you're going to do a reflect map, you can switch it over to reduce reflected elemental damage taken instead. I did try playing around without the leech mastery, but I'm just getting so much leech out of this, 3600 leech per second by not having that leech mastery is just brutal. And then because I have all of that leech, I did wind up dropping Zealot's Oath entirely. I'm one of very few people who aren't running Zealot's Oath and a flask that has the life regen suffix crafted on it. And I'm okay with that. I can live with that. Ultimately, I'm doing that to be able to have a move speed flask or potentially a curse effect reduction flask. Yeah, and I'm like I said, I'm willing to live without that Zealot's Oath to get that massive damage increase on bosses and big rares, just absolutely shredding through them with no no concern at all. You know, it's fine. A lot of people do like Zealot's Oath, especially in conjunction with that flask. I think it's a very good, like, safe approach. It just has been something that I didn't really feel that I needed. I never felt like I've ever died ever due to attrition. I always felt like every death I've ever had has been to me getting bursted, and that's why I really wanted to have a bunch of reduced extra damage from crits on my body armor and on my shield. You know, I felt like those were the overwhelming majority of the deaths were just coming from being crit for, you know, a bajillion damage, and I wanted to really put an end to that. Now, with that being said, I did think that this 4-point node here was very much a like icing on the cake type of deal. I didn't feel that I needed it for the build to function at all. Definitely didn't need to be 100 to take down Ubers or tier 17s or anything like that. You know, it's just nice if you do go to 100. It does make it a little bit easier, but not by like a huge margin or anything. I do think one other big thing I could maybe consider doing just to make myself a little bit stronger in a way that I would really enjoy is instead of running this Clarity Discipline Watcher's Eye, you know, it is giving about 1500 energy shield on hit per second. That might be underselling it, actually. You know, maybe it's more depending on whether you're counting half bolts hitting or all bolts hitting. And then you also have to count in, you know, Cyclone and Shock Nova hits and Cyclone hits per second as well. So, you know, it's definitely giving some amount of energy shield. The bigger reason that I wanted it is so that I could use it on like no regen maps and maps where like less recovery rate maps and still be able to generate energy shield. That was really the value there. But, you know, I could run a Watcher's Eye ultimately that has, you know, you're going to want to have it clarity mana added as ES. That's going to be vital. It's going to be critical for staying alive. But then you have a lot of other options. I think Wrath is kind of the one that makes the most sense to me. Getting more either just increased lightning damage on Wrath, if we compare that to the existing one, like 2.5% more damage, that's okay. Or Lightning Pin, about 10% more damage, that's pretty nasty. And, you know, I think that could be pretty good. I think Precision is all right. You know, you wouldn't want increased attack speed. That would definitely lower your trigger rate. That would mess with your trigger rate. But the idea of like increased crit multi, if you were to then drop Elemental Overload, you would then have to make some changes elsewhere to accommodate for that. But that is definitely something you could do to really expand this build and push it way beyond that like 40 million DPS mark and into the stratosphere. But, you know, doing that could get really pricey really fast. All right, so that is it for the build. As I said, I've been absolutely loving it. It has been blasting everything in the game and really just slicing through it so smooth. You know, like a hot knife through butter. Just a true delight to play. And, you know, I really think I'm just going to keep playing more of it for a while and see if I can maybe push it even further. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.